this is a good afternoon. This is one of the days that I find really fun here at the University of Waterloo, Faculty of Health, because we will be doing a Nish Vibes interview with a very special person that I got to know recently. And I hope you get a chance to listen to a few of the other Nish Vibes segments that we've had. So with that said, I want to introduce you to a dear friend of mine who, since I came to the university and started working here, I got to meet some very tremendous people. And I want to introduce you to Benny.
Hi, Myeengun. Thank you so much for having me. It's awesome.
So, Benny, it's been a long time since I've seen you, since probably the holidays. And hopefully everything went well for you over the holidays. And, you know, you're back now and we're all back doing what we do here. So why don't you tell our audience who you are and where you're from, and maybe we'll just have a little nice conversation.
Sure, yeah, thank you. So my name is Benny Skinner. You know, there's a lot of parts of me, but my dad is actually from the East Coast. He's from Uktahamguk, which is the Mi'kmaw word for Newfoundland. He's from a community called Harbour Round, which is a blended community. So we have Mi'kmaw background as well as Inuit, Irish, and French background. So very complicated history there. But it's a really lovely, very isolated community in the rural part of Newfoundland. And my mom, she's also an Indigenous person, but she's actually from the Philippines. So she is Indigenous to the island of Luzon. She is Kapampangan. So what that means is a people of the riverbanks. She's from Pampanga, which is their traditional territory, based around Mount Pinatubo. So both of my parents are island people from, you know, two great oceans, which is really amazing. And they met actually in the great meeting ground of Toronto. They both migrated there for socioeconomic reasons, right? You know, that kind of trying to, in search of a better life, you know, being able to participate in the colonial capitalist economy. So that's where I was born, and that specifically, Toronto it's a great meeting place. It's the traditional territory of Mississaugas of the Credit, Huron-Wendat peoples, the Haudenosaunee peoples, a whole ton of people all kind of share that territory, and that's the land that grew and nurtured me, which I'm really thankful for. And then I grew up in Burlington, and once I graduated to legal adulthood, so once I started university and I was 18, I actually moved here to what is known as Waterloo Region. So I attended the University of Waterloo for my bachelor's and my master's, and Waterloo is situated on the Haldeman Tract, so we are under the Dish with One Spoon covenant, of course. The two-row wampum, and this land was granted to the Six Nations, as many people who are familiar with the region will know. And I found a sense of home here. The land is beautiful. Land back camp I was a little bit involved in my earlier days here. And I've really gotten to know a lot of the urban Indigenous community here, which I've been very, very thankful for, especially just through the university. There's a lot of us who are involved here at the university, and we like to connect our communities. So I've had the really pleasant opportunity of getting to know a lot of Indigenous folks from all over the place.
How about at home? Did you get a chance to meet many people from your father's territory?
In our area, we're pretty isolated. A lot of people do have some Indigenous blood in them in the area that we're from. A lot of the white settlers will call our territory, quote unquote, Micmac land, which is obviously a derogatory way of referring to it, but there's tons of people from my community and nearby communities that are Mi'kmaq, have some Inuit blood as well. To be honest with you, a lot of us are related, closely related, and I would argue that with the loss of the clan system, it's getting a little tight in there, you know, so a lot of people have kind of left the territory and moved to other areas to, you know, find new people and new partners and things. But I got to visit a lot of my cousins in Nova Scotia recently because the North American Indigenous Games was actually hosted in Halifax very recently, as well as some nearby Indigenous communities. So I got to go visit and meet a lot of people from my Mi'kmaq nation, which was really beautiful, you know, and having that huge display of our culture was really, really special. On my mom's side, all of my family is Kapampangan, and I've met a whole ton of them. Our culture is very rich. We're very proud. We're very proud to say that we have a reputation for being some of the best cooks in Philippines, and it's a very Yeah, it's a very, very proud, immersed culture. And I'm thankful that my mom was able to bring that to our household as well, even though she's so far away from home. I've only gone to visit once, but I really do hope to go back soon.
I find that fascinating, with all these different cultures and where you were born, where you're originally from, and then you're even athletic. So you do a lot of different things here at the university. Probably your whole life you've been athletic. So you moved into this university where I think you found some sports that you started working in.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually was one of the first, Indigenous representation on the women's varsity rugby team here at University of Waterloo. And so we've been working hard in that program to make it a more friendly place towards Indigenous people and our other relatives of color. I was also one of the first openly transgender athletes to represent the Waterloo Warriors at the varsity level as well. So I'd like to say that I've made my mark here, especially in the world of athletics, just pushing forward a lot of these discussions that weren't being had when I first arrived, that are now, very, very popular discussions. And since athletics has really, picked up on these things since I was an athlete, which I'm really thankful for. We actually have a really great athletics administration for that.
I know. I've been working with athletics department for the last year, and we've done some ceremonies to open up many of the events now. So I really appreciate that. Then I remember you were at the award ceremony where we brought the Eagle staff in that day. It was the first time ever at this university, so I was really proud to participate in that. And, I think you are kind of an example of what young people, or Indigenous people in particular, align with sports, but they don't always get the chance to play. Because if you've ever seen the cost of playing hockey, the equipment and travel and registrations, it's limiting for many of our people. What you're doing is helping people get inspired, to follow their natural paths of athletics. So thank you for doing that.
Oh, you're welcome. Yeah, it's honestly, and it starts at the childhood level as well. Even here at the university this past summer, something that we experimented with was I was helping get Indigenous kids into the sports camps, just to get them introduced to the university sports environment, give their parents a break during the summer, give them something fun to do, and get them into the sports camps by alleviating the fee, right? Because usually parents can get their kids there, they can drop them off before work, pick them up after work, but the additional cost adds that labor, plus then you have to add in the cost of travel and all of these things. So we experimented with that, and it was really quite successful, just through word of mouth. Right now, the way sometimes Indigenous community we do things is kind of through our networks, but we're hoping to expand that initiative and really start at that childhood level, right? Because when these kids, when they see these opportunities, and they also see Indigenous leaders, like they see myself, I did the EDI training for the sports camps, and I made sure that cultural competency, especially towards Indigenous folks, was embedded within that training, making sure that I was able to reassure my fellow community members that your children will be safe, and if there's a problem, I'll be here. It's that relational accountability that we're starting to build, and making sure that we can get the kids in, get them into a safe environment so that, yeah, exactly, they can be inspired, and that when they're bigger, they can start to look for those opportunities and understand that those opportunities are for you too. There's a way that we can put you in these sports. There's a way we can get you there.
I noticed that there are some Indigenous tournaments like the little NHL tournament that we have in Ontario, and it's been a part of people's lives, not just the athletes, but the families. They come together and they cheer on their children and family in playing, and it's really become such an important part of our growing up. And now that we're seeing more basketball happening and other sports, I think it's been a really good transition from the time of period when we didn't have those things. And our problems that exist in First Nation communities was lack of affordability, to do these things. And then what happens when that happens? You find alternatives, and they're not always great. So I really appreciate the work you're doing here at the university, exposing, some very important needs, to recognize Indigenous athletes. So where did your athleticism, was it born in you, and you always played sports?
Great question. My dad and mom were both mildly athletic growing up. My dad's quite the basketball player. Both of them played volleyball and badminton as well. So when me and my brother, when we were being brought up, we were encouraged to go play outside all the time, and all of these different sorts of things. So I was really lucky. I had my brother and some other neighborhood kids, and I was able to, try all these different sports, at least at this schoolyard level. And when I was younger, my dad really enjoyed hockey, ice hockey, obviously growing up in the north. So we would watch hockey, and he wanted us to learn how to skate, even though he's not a very good skater himself, I won't lie. Neither is my mom. But they taught us to skate, or they at least encouraged us to learn. And we played hockey, and that was kind of my first love. You mentioned the accessibility of hockey. Of course, it was difficult, right? My parents, they went to the ends of the earth to make sure that we could play and that we didn't feel too different than other kids, because hockey really is an expensive sport. And the thing about my brother and I, too, was that we were quite good at hockey. So we were playing at a competitive level, which comes with a cost. And so, we'd have to ask, my dentist for sponsorship to help pay for things, and ask my boss at the grocery store I worked at for things. And, we always had the hand-me-down equipment, which, when you're a kid, you don't really understand. So I felt pretty self-conscious at the time, but, I still got to play. And that was a really big deal. And that was my first love, And then being able to play street hockey with my friends until the street lights went on was some of my greatest childhood memories, to be honest with you. But then I found rugby. And I think it's interesting. We talk about Indigenous athletes too, and a lot of people we think of lacrosse because our people invented that and are quite good at it. But people don't often think about rugby, I don't think, in the Turtle Island context as being something where there's a lot of Indigenous folks involved. But if you look worldwide, you look at the influence of the Maori people, you look at Indigenous folks in Australia, you look at people in the islands, Fiji, Papua New Guinea, the Indigenous population of rugby players is huge worldwide. And even in Turtle Island, there is now all Indigenous clubs popping up. We actually have one down at Six Nations. They're called Iroquois Roots. They're actually founded by a friend of mine and her mother, and it's an all Indigenous rugby club. It's based out of Six Nations, and it's awesome. And they even have junior level programs, right? And I've played with them. I've had the honor of playing with them. And so when I was 14, I was trying to make friends at a new high school, and a girl who I sat beside in homeroom math, she asked me if, next semester, would you want to try out for rugby with me? I had no idea what it was, I'm going to be honest. And I was kind of small kid, but I played hockey, so I was like, okay, I can be rough, sure, okay. I was terrible, but I made the team.
Okay.
Yeah, because I was willing to run, and I was willing to try. So I made the team. And I was terrible when I was in grade 9. I was pretty bad when I was in grade 10, I would say. But I made friends. Mm-hmm. And the thing about rugby is it has a culture of community. And that almost like a collectivist type of culture, the warmth. You'll always hear rugby players talk about that kind of the camaraderie that is involved in playing. And so I found that, and not only that, I found also a space that was a lot more queer-friendly than a lot of the other spaces that I had been in. And just being a two-spirit person, being trans, and I'm visibly racialized, and I'm a little bit strange and different than a lot of people that I was growing up with. So having this kind of, this asylum, so to speak, where everybody was community, everybody was family, we put our bodies on the line for each other, that was transformational for me. And then so I fell in love with that sport, even if I got my butt kicked for the first 2 years. And I started playing at a club, and then something clicked, and I got pretty good. And so that's, in grade 12, I got recruited by the University of Waterloo to come play varsity here. And after that, my rugby career kind of just took off. I was mediocre when I came to university compared to my other cohort members. But then by the time I got into my upper years, I was a critical player on the team because I put the work in, and I loved the sport, and I loved my community that I found there.
I think for First Nation communities, rugby itself, now I'm glad to hear that Six Nations is doing that. And we've been playing basketball and hockey for years, but this is kind of new to some of the First Nation communities. I think they look at it as they see the huddle, and they, it's just pretty rough kind of game, but I think they would excel in it. So I'm really glad it's being exposed that way. And you brought up an issue that I know is really important. Being transgender in sports is an issue in its own. We could probably have a whole conversation about that, because we have that experience in my family too. There's people who break through those barriers, and really that's what I think about you, doing these types of things, because some won't even try. They'll get that feeling of not being wanted there, and you've been able to pull yourself through that. So that's what I think our young people need to see, especially this day and age. It's just so important for us to do what is in our heart. If it's sports, then let's do it and make sure nothing stops us, no barriers. But I know society isn't there yet, with some of these sports leagues. They just don't have that ability.
I think my parents definitely, and both of them, due to the colonial traumas that their people both experienced, the goal was to suppress their Indigenous identity, their Indigenous knowledges, to suppress their pride in their indigeneity. And I think both of my parents, without realizing, they resisted that. They passed on their knowledges. They passed on pieces of their languages. They passed on stories to me. They gave me the tools. They were able to resist just enough for me to now engage in the resurgence of our cultures. I consider myself, I am a Kapampangan person and I am a Mi'kmaw person. When we talk about blood quantum and things, it's really like you could never actually pinpoint exactly, what percentage of me is X, Y, and Z, because everything is a bit of a mixing pot and my communities are a little bit blended here and there. But culturally, I know where I stand, and in terms of my traditional knowledge, I know what I have. And so I'm just so thankful to my parents who, despite all of this, because they both grew up having to go to Christian schools as well, they did, bring us to church and they put us in Catholic school and all of these things. But as they were raising us and as we continued, myself and my brother resisted and questioned, and as I'm now kind of leading our family into the Indigenous resurgence, my parents are so supportive of that. And I think that it's what they didn't know that they needed, but they set the stage for that. They really gifted me with the ability, they held on just enough for me now to take those seeds and plant them and water them, to grow this beautiful garden of both of my cultures. But it is probably one of the most beautiful things in my life that I've been gifted.
That's wonderful to hear, because we live in a society where they don't put your culture, very importantly here. It's all get a job, go to school, pay your taxes, and live a successful life that way. But I think in both the cultures that you are, the foundational pieces talk about being rooted in that culture. And then you become better, and then you can pay those taxes and you can do education a lot better because you found your identity, which is so important. If I can say, residential schools who tried to take those things from us got more confused about themselves, couldn't be honest about their love for their culture, just because society didn't accept that, and parents didn't teach that because of what they learned. So, you coming from parents from different parts of the world, instilling that pride in you, and making sure that's available for you to understand.
Mm-hmm, yeah, and it was through everything too, which it's funny, I didn't even realize it growing up. I would go to other friends' houses, and most of my friends growing up were white because I grew up in Burlington, which at the time was very white, suburban type of place. And all of their households seemed very similar to each other's and then very different from mine. So when I was growing up, I was a little bit shy to bring people to my house because I felt like they wouldn't know how to act. But then once I grew up and I started to really understand culture and how, why my food was different, why my values were different, why the language that was used at home was different, and all of these things, I started to realize even though my parents didn't outright say, today we're eating Kapampangan dishes for dinner and it wasn't outright this explicit hard thing. It was natural. It was naturally embedded, and I find that just so beautiful and something that I'm really trying to continue to hold on to and replicate. So I've been learning to cook my traditional foods. I've been learning to speak my traditional languages, which is very difficult, but you know what? My parents really, they set the stage for me to know what they are. So now I can go recover them.
Mm. And that's a pride I can probably see in your parents' eyes when you practice those things, because, to honor your parents in that way, society seems to change that, perspective now. Get out and do what you want to do. Don't worry about what you were taught. I think that's really important, especially in Indigenous culture, because we value our elders and we value, the knowledge that they present to us. And if you have both cultures doing that same thing, it shines within you. I think what Native people would like to see is that things become normal, just like they did in your family. Smudging, and not everybody does those things, but it just would be normal, like this is what Native people do. So you've been involved with land back, you've been involved with more, I guess, some of the forceful elements of getting people to understand us a little bit better. So how'd that go for you?
Yeah, I've been to quite a few things, and I think that because I'm technically a professional human rights advocate in the trans inclusion space, but I always approach that with a two-spirit framework now, because I don't see my identities as being separate, especially, and that's why I'm so thankful that in the 1990s that so many queer Indigenous folks came together and kind of decided on two-spirit as a piece of terminology we can use to at least try to articulate our experience. But it's interesting, yeah, so I bring both of my those identities to the table when I'm doing anything, which is it's very exciting, and it's very important in terms of understanding intersectionality. And so I'll go to, for example, I was recently at a counter protest there was an anti-trans protest at Kitchener City Hall, and I was there. I was wearing my Protect Trans Kids sweater. I had my non-binary flag, but I took my shoes off and I danced powwow in the middle of the fountain at Kitchener City Hall. Because for me, protecting trans folks and protecting queer folks isn't just about the queer community. It is also about respecting, existences that have been in Indigenous community and Indigenous society since time immemorial, right? And so when you exclude queer people, you're also excluding Indigenous culture. And so it was a really special and powerful moment for me, that moment. And everybody else who was there, who was not, there was other Indigenous queer people there. For example, Amy Smoke was there, Bengishimo was there. But for the people who are non-Indigenous, when they saw that, they understood that we weren't just fighting for rights to be treated as human. We're fighting for decolonization. We're fighting for the inclusion of all people. We're fighting for the understanding that two-spirit people exist. There's all of these different fronts that we are standing on the front line of. There's been a ton of marches for things like missing and murdered Indigenous women two-spirit people. There has been, we did a march for Wet'suwet'en. We do our walk around Ring Road for Every Child Matters. There is so much opportunity for mobilization and to speak truth, right? Truth and honesty and courage are so critical, and it can be so hard sometimes to be courageous and to go out there and to say what's right. But when you do, and when the other people around you do as well, it's so powerful and it's so important to moving us all forward.
I like how you associate that all with your total being, because I've been around for a while and I've seen protests about different things, environment and various things, but it becomes one classification of a person sometimes. Okay, tomorrow I'm going to fight, for the environment, and then I'll just be in that realm. But you bring your whole existence into that. You don't leave out your indigenuity and everything that you are. Mm-hmm. People, because we fall in those classifications, and then what am I fighting for today? Well, I'll be this today. It's better if it comes from the whole who you are.
Absolutely. That's a lot of my academic work is very, very much premised on that methodologically, is bringing my whole self to the table and ensuring that I'm honoring all parts of myself. That's sometimes why I struggle with the disciplines and the faculties and all they're trying to silo everything, because when I bring myself to the table to do academia, I'm not just here to talk about politics. Well, what else am I talking about? I'm talking about the environment, I'm talking about identity, sociology, I'm talking about technology, I'm talking about health, community health. All of these things have to be brought to the table in the same way that you have to bring your whole self to the table, right? I'll never abandon my queer perspective to talk about Indigenous issues, but I'll never abandon my Indigenous perspective to talk about queer issues. For me, it's all interwoven, it's all interconnected, and it's all about decolonization. Mm-hmm. I think that that's the most important thing for me.
I remember when you put on your workshop or conference, and it was about governance and talking about those different challenges that we have. And I really thought that was an eye-opener for many people, because they don't look at us from that same perspective. I think a lot of people still look at Indigenous people, well, they lost their land and, they've been fighting, and the children that they're finding at residential schools, it's a shame. But I think that conference opened up the eyes to a lot of people, letting people know about our traditional governance styles and our clans and, the systems that we put, which is different from Canadian-style government, and how that can relate to a better communication between members of, of a nation. And I know all the work you went in to put in that conference. You worked really hard to make it work, and it was successful.
Yeah, thank you. Honestly, that was one of my shining moments, I think, of 2023 for sure. The conference, just for listeners, was called Skanagunga, which is actually, it was a word gifted to me by a traditional Mohawk speaker. Her name is Bonnie Whitlow, and she's a colleague of ours. She works at Wilfrid Laurier University, and so she gifted me with this word, and there's so much depth to this word that I couldn't possibly explain it in one podcast, but a rough translation might be to come together with a good mind or with one mind. And the purpose of this event was to show people that, yes, we have the historical facts of the residential school, of the violence, of the trauma. We have these facts, but we also have so much resistance and resurgence and narratives and storytelling that uplifts Indigenous people that in the world of governance isn't often recognized. And then on top of that, our traditional governance systems didn't just go away. They might have in some areas gone dormant. They're seeds that we now have to sow and water again, but they're still here. They still live in the spirits of Indigenous people, in the spirits of our knowledge keepers, our elders, and now in the spirits of some of our young people, right? This is something that needs to be brought to the forefront because the future includes Indigenous people. And Indigenous governance is so often framed as this historical phenomenon when it's not historical at all. It's past, but it's also present, and it's also future. And that was kind of the subline of the event, was Indigenous governance and the future of leadership. And I did that very intentionally because we are in the midst of Indigenous resurgence, and the world is constantly changing in terms of the politics, in terms of the governance, the economy. And Indigenous people, we're here, and we're ready to make sure that all of our structures and systems, we're going to water those seeds again, because we're strong people. My people in the East Coast specifically, they were on the front lines of the Western European migration to Turtle Island. We've had a probably 500-year plus relationship with Western Europeans. That's a long time for people to come and take our resources and try to subjugate us and try to assimilate us and all of these things. And yet I am still sitting here, a proud Mi'kmaw person. And you can't take that away from me. You can't take that away from me with legislation. You can't take my ceremonies away from me. You can try to take my language, but I'm taking it right back, right? So this is the future is Indigenous in my mind.
What I seen too at that conference was the reminding us about how we interact with each other when we have to make decisions for our communities. And you go back to the Indigenous communities where people like that belong to those clans, they know there's a relationship somewhere, and they have a voice that stems through the clans, which we call brothers and sisters, across Turtle Island, and they want to reunite with that again. Because if we look at a voting system, like that was imposed to Indigenous people, such as the Indian Act system, we've lost our ability to communicate with our own people. So I'm really excited about our young people wanting to define that within themselves. If you don't come from a clan system, which some nations don't, they have other ways of making decisions. And I think this conference kind of opened that door, for there's another way. Because this one, when I look at politics today, it's just combative. It's just who's got the most supporters, and that's how we make decisions. It just doesn't be a healthy way of doing it.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest problems is everyone's in a rush all the time. It's this rush. I'm sure it's driven in large part by the capitalist economy, but we find that even in Indigenous research here. So I work as an Indigenous Research Advisor here at the university, and part of something that we find a huge tension in with this is the granting cycles and how everyone's in a rush. Oh, we're running this timeline. We have to do X, Y, Z, W, P, Q, R. And, we have to stop people in their tracks sometimes and say, hey, you actually need a lot more time than that, because you're going to have to form a relationship with the community you want to work with. And all of a sudden, like a little mind-blowing moment happens, and they're like, what? And it's like, well, you certainly didn't think you were just going to go in and mine all of this data and all of this sacred knowledge just out of nowhere, did you? And so I think it's similar in government. We're always trying to go so fast, and coming to consensus is a very different thing than having, just a vote of everybody on everything with no discussions, no proper debates, no proper community engagements and consultations, and the consideration for each other as well. That all takes time, because the underpinning is relationship. And so I think that's one of the biggest things. We're going too fast. We joke so much about native time, running on native time, being late, gathering for too long, eating for too long, all these things. But it's because it takes time to build trust and to cultivate an environment of care.
Well, I think that's where the concept of time is money, comes in from a capitalistic system. It doesn't mean you're getting the best quality. You're just trying to meet those needs and get the money rolling in, as quick as you can. So I think when Native people, even when the settlers came here, our concept of land measurement and things like that were so different. Like we didn't even have the concept of owning land, and still we don't see that to be the proper way. They brought that here, and they developed surveyors who started plotting out lands, for people and putting high prices on those lands. But, if we all look at this country, there's enough land for everybody. Everybody should have some land you can grow food on, and to celebrate on. But it came into that system, and I think Indigenous people are still trying to recover from that concept, because even in our First Nation communities, in my reserve, we were one of the first that they brought surveyors on and tried to plot out land, and we stopped them because this isn't how we live. We don't live this way. We share the land with the animals and the water, and we live here, and we don't hurt that land, while we're living on it. So I don't know if we'll ever get that concept, because we're so, it's became an obsession, for people to have power and money. But one of the prophecies that I've come to know is that we will see this system come and go. We'll see America come and go. And a lot of those large historical governments, with power, all disappeared at some point. But we always here, and we're still here. Even after residential schools, we're still here. So I think we're resilient enough to be able to maneuver through. They're trying to overpower us, but we definitely are still here, which was the whole concept of residential school, to get rid of us, right? So, I'm kind of proud of our people, our ancestors, to keep this motivation going during the time that we couldn't even go to school, and now it's being taught in school.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a traditional territory system, and the understanding of land occupation not as ownership, but as stewardship or as custodianship, or all these different alternative concepts. That is something that I wrote about in my master's thesis as a part of, because I'm a global governance scholar, so talking about land, oftentimes you see in the discipline in the field of global governance or political sciences, it's assumed that land occupation means ownership, how, we want to occupy this, but therefore we own it, therefore we can do whatever we want with it, therefore we are going to take it over, we're going to destroy it if we want, all of these things. Whereas in my teachings, the territory, one, you're not allowed to bar people from life-giving resources. It's inhumane. It's probably one of the worst things you could ever do as a being on this beautiful Mother Earth. And then on top of that, how can you own something? How can you own something that is greater than you? And the greater than you part is rooted in our need for this Mother Earth. She provides everything that we need to survive, everything that we need to live a good life. So how can we own that when she is greater than us? It makes no sense in my framework. And I do wish that this is a concept that people could understand on that, on that fundamental, but also on that spiritual level. Because if they could understand that, there would be a lot less of the horrible, horrible atrocities that we're seeing now. That's violent settlerism. That is, it's exactly the template that was used, and it's horrific. To destroy the olive trees in itself and to be killing all these people is probably one of the most horrific things anybody could do. But to claim that you can own something that is above you, even though she is physically below our feet, she is above us because she provides everything that we need.
It's our mother.
It's backwards.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Not just a moral obligation, but a legal obligation too. That's what these wampum belts and treaties were all about, that we would share this land, that we would be respectful of this land, that we would care for the land and never lose that concept. So if we did live up to those signed, documents, you wouldn't see homelessness. You wouldn't see climate change at the rate it is, because we would be more respectful and obligated to treat it that way. So that's why I think our concept is so important for, mainstream to understand and have these classes here, where people can feel that, it's not just a concept, it's a necessity that we have to start following the traditions of all the Indigenous people in the world, because they all come from the same place. They know that the earth is their mother, and she provides the food and the water and everything we need for survival. We got to be careful about taking too much meat, animals, plants that we need for medicine and for survival. So I think it's simple, but it's definitely this whole capitalism is so addicting. Power is so addicting. And transferring people to remember these things, I think it's a challenge. But I think in our hearts, we must know that we have to do something better. This hour has gone by so fast, and I really appreciate you, Benny, for coming and joining us here at Nish Vibes. You now work at the university. I didn't know you were recruited, so that was pretty interesting. I'm really glad that they're looking for athletes, and especially Indigenous athletes, to come. So, how long are you going to be here now? Now you're working for the university.
Well, I'm working my job. I'm permanent full time now in the office of the Vice President, Research and International. I also, fun fact, I was actually the head coach, first Indigenous head coach of varsity program here. While I was in my master's, I was supporting the program, and then our coach actually ended up having to step away from the team. So I was the sole coach of the team, which made me the first head coach, Indigenous head coach. And then I was also the first openly trans head coach in the OUA, which is really neat. I'm thinking of sticking around for a little bit, at least. I do love the University of Waterloo. I love it. And, sometimes I hate it, but only in a sense of I know that this place can be better. And that's why I love it so much, is because I've watched it get better over the last 10 years. And I've watched them make big moves. And obviously, there's still so much more to be done. But I'm here to help make those changes, until another opportunity comes my way and I might, move on to different things. But for right now, I'm planning on sticking around for a little bit. I also love the Indigenous campus community here. Everybody, you guys have been so incredibly welcoming to me. So I'm so thankful to do my education, speak my languages on your land, and to be here and get to gather in ceremony so often with such wonderful, wonderful folks, and to learn from such amazing knowledge keepers as well, such as yourself. Not to flatter you or anything, but you're of course one of my favorites. So
Thank you.
I'm planning on sticking around for a bit.
That's good to hear. I appreciate that. We got a lot of work to do still, like you said. We're at the beginning stages of this decolonization. It's going to take some time, but I think with your help and what you've learned and your passion for this, I think it's a good team. And I think we can go quite a ways still, from now. So really quickly, what are you into, music and stuff like that? More personal than that. We got to close off in a few minutes, but
music. Man, I'm all over the place. You know what me and my family are going to do? We're going to see the Eagles in concert.
No way.
Yeah,
man.
and the whole lot of us too. My mom, dad, and my brother. We're all going together, and we're gonna have a great fancy time because we used to listen to them growing up. And you know, my dad, he's quite good at playing guitar and singing, so we play together and we play the Eagles music and stuff like that. So I would say that my mom loves Shania Twain and Prince. You know,
Who is got a name status card? Shania Twain does.
yeah, yeah.
Not blood, but she's got a status card.
Yeah, it's you know, I listen to a lot of random stuff, but I do love the Eagles. I won't lie to you.
Oh, I forgot to buy tickets, so I'm gonna probably have to get a scalper, but but I got to go because I missed them when they came before Glenn Fry died, and my brother and sister went, and I just couldn't make it, so I got to get there because they're closing out their their band. So
Oh, you know who I also listen to a lot, and especially in the gym, is Snotty Rose Res Kids.
Okay.
I won't lie. They have this song called Northern Lights. It's featuring Mob Bounce, and it is actually one of my favorite songs ever. It slams really hard.
I met them at the Juno Awards in London a couple years ago, and it was so much fun, hanging around them. So they've done some great work. So
Absolutely.
So anyway, we're going to close off today's segment. Please always let us know what you're interested in. And Benny, thanks so much for joining us today. It was an honor to spend this hour with you, and looking forward to more work together with you in the future.
Wailalan, thank you so much, Myeengun.
Okay, miigwech.